Pittsburgh Steelers fans, today we're talking all the reasons why it doesn't make sense to bring Ryan Tannehill in as a quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm Matty P with another episode of Steelers Touch Down Under. All right, let's get straight into it. So there's been a lot of talk with the hiring of Arthur Smith as OC about could they bring in Ryan Tannehill if it became available. Well, Ryan Tannehill's had an interesting career at Miami and Tennessee. He had 2 very productive years under Arthur Smith at Tennessee. Now, it makes sense that people would want to attribute that. It makes sense that people are interested in that. Now, I don't think Kirk Cousins, for example, is worth the money that he would require, especially what the stipulated like $45 million a year apparently that he's asking for plus. So I understand why people then go, well, what's another cheap option for a veteran if they're decidedly out on Kenny Pickett or if the Steelers can't bring back Mason Rudolph. Now, the Steelers are all in likelihood, and I don't think that there's less than 90% of the fan base that aren't for this, going to cut Mitch Trubisky. That then makes available a QB spot, which they could fill with a late draft pick, and a veteran. Now, Mason Rudolph, if he doesn't sign, you do need someone that's capable of starting 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 plus games. And if you're not out on Kenny Pickett, you may be saying the whole season. So it is an issue for the Steelers in terms of can they re-sign Mason Rudolph. I think his heart's here. I think he wants to be here. He's close to all those Steelers legends. I think that the fact that this redemption story, he could be really keen on that. So, but assuming they still need to fill that other spot and Tannehill did become available at cut price, should they do it? Interesting. Should they replace him for Mason Rudolph? That's the other big question for people. So I thought I'd take a quick look into it. Like, what do his stats actually look like? What's his production been on the field? What are the wins? How does it look? Particularly versus Kenny Pickett rather than Mason Rudolph, because really, we as Steel fans, we want Kenny Pickett to do well just as much as we want Mason to do well. This team needs a drafted rookie first rounder to perform well. The 5th-year option on that, the ability to keep players, to put a team around him that can compete, that is vital. And if Mason Rudolph can just sort of get us there while Kenny Pickett continues to develop, that'll be key. Or worst case, transition us into the next quarterback. But it's important to look at the context of you bring in Tannehill, you're probably bringing him here to fight for a starting spot. Is that the smartest thing? And that's the lens at which I look at this sort of discussion around should the Steelers bring in Ryan Tannehill? So, interesting on the player comparisons. So I brought this up on StatHead Football. This is a subscription part of Pro Football Reference. It allows you to do a few things. You can use some of it generally, but there's extra features. Like you can compare up to 6, 7 players, which regular subs to the channel know. That I often do that with some of the stat stuff we do. But anyway, Kenny Pickett's played 25 games overall. Ryan Tannehill's played 155. Obviously, there's bigger margin for wins and there's bigger margin for losses. There's bigger margin for success. There's bigger margin for failure the more games you play. But also, Kenny Pickett's an underdeveloped rookie in my mind, where he's not even been able to play through properly 10 games in a season. Now, Kenny Pickett, it is an interesting situation with Kenny Pickett overall. When you look at the winning percentage, he's 7-5, a starter. You look at Tannehill, he's 78-65. That's a 58+% winning percentage for Kenny Pickett. That's a 54% plus for Ryan Tannehill. Now, I know Ryan Tannehill's played more games, but Kenny Pickett can only win the games he's played in, and he'll also games that that he was injured in early as well. So that's the other thing. That Cardinals game as well, he was playing well before he got injured. So there are some of those different things to keep in mind. So yeah, that is one thing that you want to look at there. The other thing that I think is interesting too is the interception percentage. So you're going to see this on your screen right now. It's going to probably be pretty small, but it is this 1.8 to 2.4%. So Ryan Tannehill throws an interception on 2.4% of all his passes. Kenny Pickett throws an interception 1.8% on all his passes. But when you look at touchdowns, Ryan Tannehill throws a TD on 4.5% of his passes versus Kenny Pickett's 1.8%. It is also interesting, though, that Kenny Pickett, that red zone offense with Matt Canada, red zone offense failures, they ran a lot of that. They snuck in. You look at the amount of rushing touchdowns as well that Kenny Pickett has versus Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill's played over 11 seasons in the league for 27 overall TDs. Kenny Pickett's kind of played 1.5 seasons for 4 TDs. So Kenny Pickett definitely is somewhat as a guy there, though, that is producing at that same rate. It's a very different thing in the course of Ryan Tannehill's career and the teams he's played on versus the current Steelers setup, particularly on offense. Put aside their great defense. I also wanted to compare what it looked like over the last couple of years, because it's one thing to say, like, under Arthur Smith, Ryan Tannehill did do pretty well. He actually did do pretty well, but when you go look at some of the years of the actual passing production, the passing production part of it, it's not crazy far ahead of Kenny Pickett, and it's not like each season's over 4,000 yards. So that's one thing to think about. But you look at Ryan Tannehill over the last 2 years, when Kenny Pickett's been, since Kenny Pickett was drafted, versus Kenny Pickett's stats since he was drafted. Tannehill's played 16 games. Kenny Pickett's played 13. Kenny Pickett's a 7-5 record. Tannehill is a 7-9 record. Completion percentage, Kenny Pickett 63%. For all the people out there that think Kenny Pickett's not accurate, 63% versus Tannehill's 58.3%. Tannehill has a lot more pass yards, playing in a much more, like I would say, established offense from that regard. But the pass yards per attempt is 0.6 difference. So there's less than a 10% variance overall on those guys. Passing game is higher with Tannehill, but also behind a very established run game with Derrick Henry. That opens things up. It means the defense has got to think about things. Tannehill does have 12 TDs versus Kenny Pickett's 7. Interception rate, though, Kenny Pickett has less, but it's more than his past TDs by 2. Tannehill, it's more by 1. So they're both throwing more interceptions when they have touchdowns. But remember, Kenny Pickett is the rookie guy developing that we're talking about on a very poor offense. Quarterback rating, Kenny Pickett higher by 0.6. So you look at rush attempts is higher, but his rush yards is higher. Again, rush yards per attempt is the same, but Kenny Pickett's had to do it more because he's been in a worse offense. He has 3 versus 2 rush TD. So that those stats kind of wrap it up for you. I mean, why would you draft and why would you sort of bring in Ryan Tannehill? The cost of that, the risk of not continuing not to develop Kenny Pickett, the new chemistry he's going to have to get with all those players. He might be used to Arthur Smith as OC. He's not used to the Pittsburgh Steelers, offensive players. It's going to be different offense probably from Arthur Smith versus what he saw in Tennessee as well. It's not all going to be exactly the same. He's not just going to plug and play that straight out. So interesting perspectives on people wanting to sign Ryan Tannehill. I'm not a fan of it. I won't hate it if they do it, but I think that it's a waste of time, a waste of money, considering you've already got Kenny Pickett on the roster, which he can do everything Tannehill can do and more, provided he's in the right offense. As always, go Steelers.